I beg you, set me free. Human interrupts alien ritual to sacrifice woman to their gods. Captain Nathan Drake stepped off the shuttle and onto the surface of the Zarithian homeworld, feeling a mixture of awe and tension in the air. The planet was a paradox of extremes. Its surface was a blend of lush jungles and ancient stone cities, while the sky above seemed to be a deep violet, even at midday. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. The Zarithians were a strange, powerful species. Their technology advanced, but their culture steeped in traditions that seemed almost archaic. He glanced over at the delegation of diplomats and soldiers accompanying him, all of them silent, sensing the weight of the mission. This wasn't just about trade or politics. It was about something far more delicate. Relations between Earth and the Zarithians had been strained for years, and now it was Nathan's job to smooth over the rough edges. His orders were clear: maintain peace, build trust, and don't make waves. The air smelled different here, thick, almost sweet, with a hint of something metallic in the breeze. A few Zarithian officials in elaborate robes greeted the delegation, nodding their heads in greeting, their eyes hidden behind intricate, jeweled masks. Nathan returned the gesture, suppressing a shiver. It was the first time he had ever seen beings like this up close, tall, with smooth, glowing skin and elaborate tattoos covering their bodies. They radiated an energy he couldn't quite describe, like something ancient and powerful. "Captain Nathan Drake," one of them spoke in perfect English, his voice soft and formal. "Welcome to our home. The council is honored to receive you." Nathan offered a polite smile, his instincts screaming at him to remain alert. "Thank you, we're honored to be here." Their leader, a woman named Talus, was the highest-ranking diplomat among the Zarithians. She was as regal as she was intimidating, with deep purple eyes that seemed to pierce through Nathan's every thought. As she led them toward the central meeting hall, Nathan couldn't help but notice the crowds of Zarithians gathered in the city square. Their faces were a mixture of reverence and fear, their expressions distant, almost resigned. The people seemed to carry a weight of history on their shoulders, a sense of something that had always been this way, something that had always been the truth. After a long walk through winding stone paths, the delegation arrived at a vast, open hall, its ceiling high above them, covered in what looked like a woven net of glimmering metal. A few alien priests, their eyes glowing with an inner light, greeted them with a mix of formality and pride. The scene felt surreal, and Nathan's military training kicked in as he scanned the room, always assessing, always looking for anything that could be a threat. They were here to negotiate a trade deal, yes, but there was something about this place that felt off, like the very air was charged with a secret. Nathan couldn't quite place it, but he knew that something wasn't right. Talus's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Captain Drake, we wish to invite you to witness something truly sacred to our people." Nathan blinked, startled by the sudden invitation. "What kind of something?" "A ritual," Talus said, her eyes gleaming with an emotion he couldn't quite read. "A tradition that has been passed down through generations. It's a part of our lives, our identity." Despite his unease, Nathan nodded. There was no way to refuse without causing offense, especially with the stakes so high. "I'll be honored to witness it." They were led to an open courtyard, its walls adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shift and move as they walked. The courtyard was eerily quiet, save for the occasional flutter of wings from creatures Nathan couldn't identify. The priests and officials took their positions around a raised platform, their faces solemn as they prepared for the ceremony. The ground beneath their feet began to hum, the air thickening as if charged with static. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He glanced at the other members of the delegation, but they seemed unfazed, almost indifferent, like they had seen this all before. "What's happening?" Nathan asked quietly, his voice low. "This is the Sathnar," Talus explained. "The binding of the chosen. It is our sacred duty to offer one of our own as a sacrifice to the gods. It ensures the continued prosperity of our people." Nathan's stomach twisted at the words, but he didn't show it. He had heard rumors about the Zarithian customs, about their dark rituals, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerations. Now, standing here, he could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The air itself seemed to pulse with the anticipation of what was to come. From behind a curtain of thick, shimmering fabric, a figure appeared. It was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, her body bound in chains. Her skin, too, glowed faintly, a soft green that seemed to blend with the glowing patterns etched across her skin. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, escorted by two priests, and Nathan's heart skipped a beat as he realized who she was. It was Ariana, the young scientist who had been part of the Zarithian delegation Nathan had met earlier. She had seemed so calm, so intelligent. But now she looked utterly terrified. The crowd around them began to chant, their voices rising in unison. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, each word reverberating in Nathan's chest. He could feel the power of the words, and for the first time since arriving, he understood just how serious this was. Ariana was the chosen one. She was going to die. Nathan's thoughts spun. This couldn't be happening. He had to do something. But what? He was just one man, one human among hundreds of Zarithians, all of whom seemed to accept this tradition without question. They didn't even seem to care that a life, Ariana's life, was about to be extinguished in the name of some ancient god. The priests led Ariana to the center of the platform, her chains clicking against the stone. They began to chant louder, their voices rising in a frenzy, almost as if they were feeding off the energy in the air. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. Talus's voice was calm, almost reverent. This is how it has always been. The gods demand a sacrifice. But something inside Nathan snapped. He couldn't stand by and let this happen. He wasn't here to watch a woman die for some alien gods. He wasn't going to be a passive observer in a place where cruelty was veiled as tradition. Before he could stop himself, Nathan took a step forward. His boots struck the stone floor with a sharp click, and all eyes turned toward him. "No," Nathan's voice rang out loud and firm, filled with disbelief. "This is wrong." The chanting stopped instantly. The priests and the gathered Zarithians stared at him, stunned, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. "I beg you," Nathan continued, his voice shaking with urgency, "set her free. You can't do this." Talus's expression hardened, her gaze narrowing. "You are out of line, Captain. This is our sacred duty. The gods will punish you for this insolence." But Nathan didn't care. His mind was made up. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. He took another step forward towards the platform. The priests scrambled to intercept him, their hands raised as if to stop him, but Nathan was faster. He reached out, grabbing the chains that bound Ariana and pulling them free with one swift motion. For a moment, everything was still. The crowd, the priests, even Ariana, all stood frozen in place as if they couldn't quite process what had just happened. Then the high priest, Aloth, stepped forward, his voice booming with fury. "You have defied the gods themselves, human. You will pay for this." Nathan stood his ground, breathing heavily, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about a ritual anymore. This was about something far bigger. Ariana's eyes met his, full of fear and gratitude. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. And then the ground trembled beneath their feet. Nathan's hand still gripped the chains that had bound Ariana. The air around them hummed with tension, as if the very ground beneath their feet was holding its breath. The priests, frozen in shock, slowly began to stir, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had never seen a human act this way before. Never seen anyone challenge the sacred laws of the Zarithian gods. For a long moment, silence ruled the courtyard. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, each beat reverberating in his ears. Ariana stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. She was free, freer than she had been in moments, in hours, in what could be a lifetime, but at what cost? "Release her, human," Aloth, the high priest, said in a voice that rang with anger and authority. "You have no idea what you've done." Nathan stood his ground, the chains still in his grip, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "I don't care about your gods or your rituals. No one deserves this." Ariana glanced up at him, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You don't understand. If I'm not sacrificed, we'll all suffer. The gods, they won't let us go. They never have." Nathan's eyes flickered to the crowd that had gathered around the platform. The Zarithians stood motionless, their faces as unreadable as the night sky. They seemed to be waiting for something, an answer, a command, something that would tell them how to react to this unprecedented act. Aloth's voice cut through the stillness. "You have defiled everything we believe in. You have disrespected our gods, and for that you will pay." Nathan's pulse quickened. He didn't know what he expected. He had never thought about what would happen after his actions, but he hadn't expected it to feel so final. The weight of what he had done was pressing on him now. What would happen to him, to Ariana, to everyone who had witnessed this moment? He heard a rustle and the sound of approaching footsteps. The other priests were moving, their robes flowing like shadows as they formed a circle around the platform. They were not just angry, they were scared. Nathan could see it in their eyes. They had never faced a challenge like this before. Ariana stepped closer to him, her voice low and shaky. "You've made a terrible mistake. You've broken the law of the gods. You've doomed us." Nathan shook his head, his hands still clutching the chains. "No, I'm not going to let them take you, not like this. I won't stand by and watch another innocent life be destroyed for the sake of some outdated tradition." "Outdated?" Aloth's voice grew louder, a touch of venom seeping through. "Do you think your puny human ways can change centuries of sacred law? You are nothing but a child in the face of the divine." Nathan didn't flinch. "Maybe I'm just a child. But I'm not going to let someone die just because your gods demand it." The high priest took a step forward, raising his hands as if to signal the priests behind him. "The gods are watching, human. You will pay the price for your arrogance. And when they come, they will make you suffer." Before Nathan could respond, the ground trembled beneath his feet once more. It wasn't a soft, subtle shift. It was a deep, powerful shake that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. Nathan staggered, almost losing his balance, but he kept his grip on the chains. The priests recoiled, their faces stricken with fear. Aloth's expression hardened. "The gods, they are angry. You've invoked their wrath." The sky overhead seemed to darken, and a cold wind swept through the courtyard. The air grew thick with tension. Nathan felt it in his bones, the feeling of being watched by something far greater, far older than anything he had ever known. The gods of the Zarithians were real, and they were not happy. A strange sound filled the air, like a low, rumbling growl. Nathan looked around, his eyes searching the sky for some sign of what was happening. In that moment, he realized just how deep the danger ran. The gods weren't just myths, they were forces that could destroy them all in the blink of an eye. Ariana gripped his arm, her face pale. "We have to leave now, they're coming." Nathan's mind raced. He didn't know what he had expected when he intervened, but he hadn't anticipated the fury of ancient alien gods. And yet in this moment it was clear. The Zarithians weren't just bound by tradition. They were bound by fear. "Please," Ariana pleaded. "If you care about me, if you care about anyone here, you have to get me out of here." Nathan glanced at the priests, then back at the high priest. Aloth's face was now twisted with fury, but there was something else behind his anger, something Nathan couldn't quite identify. Fear, it was in Aloth's eyes, in the way he trembled slightly as the rumbling continued beneath their feet. The ground shook again, more violently this time, knocking everyone off their feet. The Zarithian priests fell to the ground, some of them crying out in panic. Nathan quickly pulled Ariana toward the edge of the platform, his mind racing. He had to think, had to act. The gods might be watching, but they were not the only force in this world. "You have to trust me," Nathan said, his voice low and urgent. "We can't stay here. We need to find a way out now." Ariana nodded, but her face was etched with fear. "They'll find us. There's nowhere safe. They never let anyone escape. They've always been watching, always." Nathan looked around desperately. The courtyard was still shaking, but the priests were now retreating into the shadows, their chants growing frantic. Aloth stood at the center, his hands raised to the sky as if calling for something, calling for the gods. But whatever power they had, it was not enough to stop what was coming. A deep, resonating voice echoed through the courtyard. It wasn't a sound that could be easily described. It was like the voice of the planet itself, rumbling from the core, reverberating through Nathan's bones. "You dare defy us?" The words shook the very air. It was not just the sound that was terrifying, it was the raw, unfiltered power behind it. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as he realized that this was no ordinary voice. This was the voice of a god, or something far worse. Ariana's face paled even further. "They're here." Nathan turned to her, his mind racing. There was no time to waste. He had to act now before the full wrath of the gods descended upon them. "We're getting out of here," Nathan said firmly. He wasn't sure how, but he would find a way. The air grew colder, the rumbling intensifying. Nathan felt something shift, like the very fabric of reality was warping around them. The gods were not going to let them go easily, but Nathan was done being a spectator. He wasn't about to let an innocent woman die, not while he had the power to stop it. He turned to the priests, his voice steady despite the growing chaos. I won't let you do this. If you think you can stop me, then come at me. And in that moment, Nathan Drake understood what it meant to truly defy the gods. It wasn't about strength. It was about courage, the courage to stand firm, even in the face of unimaginable power. The ground continued to rumble beneath Nathan's feet, each tremor more powerful than the last. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was charged with something ancient and untamable. Ariana's grip on Nathan's arm tightened, her face pale with fear. She glanced around, her eyes wide with terror as the priests scrambled to regroup, their chants growing louder, more desperate. "Please, we need to move," Ariana whispered, her voice trembling. "They're going to destroy everything. You don't understand the power they have." Nathan barely heard her. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a plan. The rumbling was intensifying, and the strange voice that had echoed through the courtyard still reverberated in his chest. He could feel it deep in his bones, the unrelenting power of the gods. The high priest Aloth stood at the center of the platform, his arms raised to the sky as if pleading with the gods for mercy. His face was twisted with fury, but there was a flicker of something else, a hint of fear. Nathan had never seen a being so powerful, so revered, show even the slightest sign of vulnerability. But in that moment, Aloth was afraid. He knew something Nathan didn't. The gods weren't just angry. They were capable of destroying everything in their path. "Get back," Aloth shouted, his voice hoarse. "Do not interfere with the gods. You will bring ruin upon us all." The priests around him hesitated for a moment, then quickly scrambled to form a protective circle around the platform. Their eyes flickered nervously toward the sky, as if expecting something to come crashing down from above. Nathan felt a chill race down his spine. The gods were coming. He could feel it, the very air thick with their presence. "We have to leave," Nathan said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Now," Ariana nodded, her expression filled with a mix of relief and dread. She didn't need to be told twice. She was scared, and for good reason. She had lived under the shadow of these gods her entire life, and she knew exactly what they were capable of. If Nathan hadn't intervened, she would have been sacrificed. Her life snuffed out like a candle in the wind, all for the sake of a centuries-old tradition. Nathan's heart raced. He had no idea what would happen next. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't let Ariana be taken again, but they couldn't just leave without a plan. The tremors beneath their feet grew stronger, the ground shaking as if some massive force was approaching. Nathan's thoughts spun. They were running out of time. He glanced back at the priests. They were still chanting, their voices rising in unison, and Nathan could see their fear that wasn't just about the ritual. Something was happening, something much bigger than they had anticipated. The sky darkened, swirling clouds gathering above them, swirling like a storm. The rumbling increased to a deafening roar. Nathan could feel it vibrating through his body. The ground beneath them cracked open, and from the depths of the earth something began to emerge, a dark shape, massive and incomprehensible, rising slowly into the air. Ariana gasped, her face draining of color. "They're coming." Nathan's eyes widened as the shape fully emerged from the ground. It wasn't a ship or any form of technology he could recognize. It was something else, something ancient. The air around them seemed to warp as the entity rose, its form shifting and twisting, an enormous, shadowy figure that seemed to block out the sky. Its presence was overwhelming, and the force of its power pressed in on Nathan's chest, like he was suffocating under a mountain. "You dare defy us?" The voice boomed again, resonating from all around them, a low, guttural sound that rattled Nathan's bones. It wasn't just a voice. It was an attack, a wave of force that seemed to come from every direction. His head swam, and for a moment he thought he might lose consciousness. He could feel the weight of the gods pressing down on him, and he knew that if he didn't act fast, he wouldn't be able to stand up against it. But in the midst of the terror, a thought struck him like lightning. The gods weren't just here, they were watching everything. They had been watching since he had interrupted the ritual, and now they were angry. But there was something else, something he could use. Ariana had mentioned that the gods fed on fear. The more afraid the Zarithians were, the more power the gods seemed to gain. What if there was a way to break that cycle? What if he could do something to take the power out of their hands? His mind raced, trying to piece everything together. There had to be a way. He had to believe there was a way. "Ariana," Nathan said urgently, his voice low. "I need you to trust me. Do you know anything about how they operate, about how we can stop them?" Ariana blinked, her eyes wide with shock. How can you stop them? They are the gods. We can't fight them. But Nathan was already moving, pulling her along with him. He had no time to explain. His thoughts were tumbling over each other as he began running toward the priests, whose chants had turned into desperate pleas for mercy. The godlike entity loomed overhead, casting a shadow that made the entire courtyard feel like an abyss. Nathan reached the priests, his mind still spinning. He needed information, anything that could help him fight back. "Eloth!" Nathan shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "You need to tell me everything you know about these gods. How do we stop them?" "What's their weakness?" Eloth's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and fear. "You are a fool," he spat. "You cannot fight them. You have no power here. They will." But Nathan didn't wait for him to finish. He grabbed the high priest's arm and pulled him closer, his voice hard. "Tell me what you know. If I'm going to stop them, I need to know what I'm up against." Eloth's expression shifted for a moment, and Nathan saw something else in the high priest's eyes, a glimmer of understanding. He could see that Eloth was afraid. He could see that, deep down, even the priests didn't believe they had control over the gods anymore. "They feed on fear," Eloth muttered, his voice shaking. "The more we fear them, the stronger they become. That's how it's always been. They take our fear and turn it into power. They use it to control us, to keep us in line. But there's one way to break their grip. One way to free us." Nathan leaned in closer, barely able to hear Eloth's words over the rumbling noise that filled the air. "You must challenge them directly," Eloth said, his voice barely a whisper. "You must show no fear. If you can face them without fear, they lose their power, but no one has ever dared to do it. No one has ever been strong enough." Nathan's heart raced as the realization hit him. The fear wasn't just in the Zarithians, it was in him too. And if he was going to stand a chance, he had to rid himself of that fear. He had to confront the gods, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. If he showed even the slightest sign of weakness, it would be over. He turned to Ariana, who was still trembling beside him, her eyes wide with terror. "We're going to challenge them," he said firmly, his voice full of determination. "We're going to show them we're not afraid, and we're going to free your people." Ariana looked at him, her fear giving way to something else, something like hope. How can we do it?" Nathan swallowed hard, his mind racing. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. I have to." And as he turned back toward the massive figure looming in the sky, he knew that whatever came next, there was no turning back. He was going to face the gods, and he would do whatever it took to save Ariana, to save the Zarithians, and to prove that no power, no matter how ancient, could break the human spirit. The atmosphere was electric with tension, the air thick with the overwhelming presence of the gods. Nathan stood at the edge of the courtyard, his mind racing as the enormous shadow above him continued to grow. The gods, whatever they were, had descended into the world of the Zarithians, their power so vast it felt like the entire planet itself was trembling beneath their might. Ariana stood beside him, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. She was afraid, Nathan could see it in her eyes, but there was something else there now too, something stronger than fear. Hope. For the first time since Nathan had broken the ritual, she had a flicker of hope in her gaze. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it gave Nathan the strength he needed to push forward. "We can't let them win," Nathan said quietly, more to himself than to Ariana. "We have to stand firm. We can't let them break us." The god's presence pressed in on them, suffocating in its power. The rumbling of the ground continued, as if some massive beast was stirring just beneath the earth. Nathan glanced at the priests who had surrounded the platform, their faces filled with terror. Eloth, the high priest, was still standing at the center, his arms raised, his eyes locked on the swirling darkness in the sky above. "They are not gods," Nathan muttered. "They're something else, and they're not invincible." Ariana's voice was barely a whisper. "You don't understand, Nathan. These beings have ruled us for centuries. They've shaped our entire society. If you defy them, there's nothing left, nothing but destruction." Nathan turned to face her, his eyes hard with resolve. "Then we'll rebuild. If they take everything from you, if they take this world, there's nothing to be afraid of anymore. I won't let them do that." Ariana's gaze flickered to the dark figure above them, the shape now clearly visible against the stormy sky. It was not a single being, as Nathan had first thought. It was a mass, an amorphous, shifting presence that seemed to take on multiple forms, its shape constantly changing, never settling into any one shape for long. It was as if the gods themselves were not beings with bodies, but forces of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting. "We have to stop them," Nathan said, his voice full of conviction. "But we can't do it alone." He turned to Aloth, who had been standing frozen in place, his face pale with fear. The high priest's mouth moved as if he were trying to speak, but no words came out. It was clear now that even the priests who had once served these gods were powerless against them. Their faith was no match for the sheer force of the gods' presence. "Aloth," Nathan shouted, stepping toward him. "You're the one who knows the most about these gods. Help us. Tell me what we need to do to stop them." For a long moment, Aloth didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the figure in the sky, his body rigid with terror. Then slowly he looked at Nathan, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "You don't understand," Aloth said, his voice trembling. "No one has ever dared defy them. If you challenge them directly, you'll only bring ruin to yourself. There's nothing we can do. We're all at their mercy now." Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let the fear show. "I didn't come here to beg for mercy," he said firmly. "I came here to fight. And I'm not going to stop until we've won." Aloth seemed to falter, as if something within him had finally broken through the fear. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the rumbling beneath their feet grew louder, and the figure in the sky began to descend, faster now, its massive shape swallowing the sky above them. It was almost upon them. Nathan's heart raced. He could feel the overwhelming power of the gods pressing in on him, but he refused to be intimidated. He had to face this, not with fear, but with everything he had. He looked at Ariana, whose eyes were wide with fear, and he took her hand. Her grip was tight, but she didn't pull away. "We're going to face them together," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, not with me." Ariana's eyes searched his face, and for a moment he thought she might break down. But instead she nodded, her face set with determination. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. "I want to be free." Nathan squeezed her hand and turned his attention back to the sky. The massive figure was almost upon them now. It was no longer a mere shape. It was a presence, a force that seemed to consume everything in its path. The sky darkened even more, and the wind howled as if nature itself was rebelling against the gods' arrival. The priests, still gathered around the platform, began to chant louder, their voices rising in a desperate, frenzied rhythm. It was clear now that they were not calling for mercy, but for power, to feed the gods' hunger. They were offering up their fear as fuel for the gods' wrath. But Nathan wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't going to be a pawn in this ritual. He wasn't going to stand by and watch these people sacrifice themselves for nothing. If there was any chance of winning, he had to act now. He turned to Aloth once more. "What do I need to do?" he demanded. Aloth hesitated, his eyes flickering to the gods above. He seemed torn, as if part of him still believed in their power. But then his shoulders slumped and he let out a heavy sigh. "There's only one way," he said quietly. "Only one way to stop them. You have to challenge them directly. You have to face them without fear. If you show them even a hint of weakness, they will destroy you. But if you stand firm, if you show them that you are not afraid, they will lose their power." Nathan nodded. It was exactly what he had been thinking. This was their chance. The gods fed on fear. If he could stand before them and refuse to bow, refuse to be afraid, then maybe, just maybe, they could break their hold over this world. He turned to Ariana. "Stay close to me. Don't let them get to you. Whatever happens, don't let them see fear in your eyes." Ariana nodded, her face set with determination. "I trust you, Nathan." With that, Nathan turned to face the gods, his heart pounding in his chest. The massive figure in the sky was now only a few hundred feet above them, its presence overwhelming, blocking out the sun. The air was so thick with power that it felt like it was pressing down on his chest. The god's voice boomed again, louder this time, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "You dare to defy us?" The words were like thunder, crashing into Nathan's mind, threatening to overwhelm him. But Nathan stood tall. He took a deep breath, focusing on the strength inside him, the resolve that had carried him through countless battles. He would not let them break him. He would not let them take Ariana or this world or anyone else, not today. "I do," Nathan shouted back, his voice firm and unwavering. "I dare. I will not bow to you. You are not gods. You are nothing but beings that feed on fear. And I refuse to give you that power." There was a moment of silence, a strange, pregnant pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then the ground shook again, harder this time, as if the gods were trying to break him with sheer force. But Nathan stood his ground. He didn't flinch, he didn't look away. And as he stood there face to face with the gods, he realized that this moment was the true test. It wasn't about defeating them physically. It was about defying them mentally, spiritually. It was about standing firm in the face of terror and refusing to be broken. And for the first time since his arrival on this alien world, Nathan felt a spark of hope. The silence that followed Nathan's challenge was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The air around them was thick with tension, the weight of the gods' presence pressing down on the courtyard like an invisible storm. Nathan stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands clenched at his sides. He could feel Ariana beside him, her grip tight but steady, her presence a silent reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. For a long moment, nothing happened. The gods, or whatever they were, didn't respond. Nathan's eyes stayed locked on the swirling mass above, the figure that had loomed over them for so long, its shifting form blocking out the light and casting the entire courtyard into shadow. Then, without warning, the voice of the gods boomed once more. It wasn't a voice from above, but from within the very air around them, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. "You dare stand against us, human?" The words vibrated in the air, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "You are nothing. Your kind is weak. You will fall as all who defy us have fallen." The force of the voice was overwhelming, pushing against Nathan like a physical weight, threatening to knock him off his feet. But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He stood firm, his resolve unbroken. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Nathan shouted back, his voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you. You feed on fear, but I'm done giving it to you." For a split second, there was only silence. The air was thick, heavy with the energy of the gods, and Nathan could feel every nerve in his body vibrating with the force of their presence. But then, slowly, the massive shadow in the sky began to shift. The swirling mass of darkness started to separate, revealing glimpses of what lay within it. Figures, enormous and indistinct, their outlines barely visible against the blackness. Ariana's breath caught beside him, and Nathan could feel her fear, still there beneath the surface. But she didn't pull away. She stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly, her body trembling but refusing to break. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't afford to look away to show any weakness. He could feel the intensity of their gaze on him, even though he couldn't see their eyes. It was as if they were watching him through every part of his being, digging into his soul, trying to find a crack they could exploit. The god's voice came again, this time softer but no less powerful. "You think you can defy us?" The words were mocking, almost amused. "You think you can stand against the ancient power of the gods? Your strength is nothing. Your resolve is nothing. You will kneel as all have before you." Nathan's pulse raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of fury and fear. But he didn't back down. He couldn't. If he did, everything he had fought for, everything he had come to this planet for, would be lost. Ariana's life, the future of the Zarithian people, all of it hinged on this moment. "I won't kneel," Nathan said, his voice strong, steady. "You may be ancient, but you're not invincible. You feed on fear, but I'm done giving it to you. I'm not afraid." "And neither is she." He nodded toward Ariana. Ariana's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw something in her gaze that wasn't fear. It was defiance. It was courage. She stood beside him, not as a victim, but as an equal. Her resolve matched his own, and in that moment Nathan realized that together they had the strength to face whatever these gods could throw at them. The god's voice grew louder, now filled with a sense of outrage. "You dare claim equality with us? You are nothing but mortals. Fleeting, fragile, weak, you will bow before us or you will perish." Nathan took a step forward, his heart pounding, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't know how, but he knew this was the only way. He had to face them head-on. "You're wrong," he shouted, his voice ringing out, defiant and unyielding. "I'm not a god, and I don't need to be one, but I know what it means to fight for something that matters, and I'm not backing down." The ground beneath them shook violently, and the sky above seemed to crack open, as if the heavens themselves were about to collapse. The air grew colder, the wind howling as if some great storm were about to swallow them whole. Nathan felt the raw power of the gods pressing down on him, trying to break his resolve. But he held firm, his feet planted in the earth, his body steady. The massive shadow above them began to coalesce, forming into distinct shapes, each one more terrifying than the last. They were not gods, not in the way the Zarithians had believed. They were something older, something primal. Their forms twisted and shifted like smoke, impossible to comprehend, but each one radiated a power that was beyond anything Nathan had ever encountered. But still he stood. He stood because he had no other choice. The gods spoke again, their voices a cacophony of sounds, each one pushing against his mind like a physical blow. You are brave, human, but you are foolish. You cannot defeat us. You will die and your world will burn. Ariana stepped forward, standing beside Nathan, her face set with a determination that mirrored his own. No, she said, her voice steady and strong. You are the ones who are foolish. You have kept us in fear for too long. You've controlled us with lies and rituals, but we are not your pawns, and we will not be your sacrifices anymore. The gods' presence seemed to waver for a moment, as if they were taken aback by Ariana's words. Nathan could feel the shift, a crack in their power. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He knew what he had to do. He turned to Ariana, his eyes meeting hers. Are you ready? She nodded, her face full of determination. I am. Together they turned back toward the gods. The swirling figures above them seemed to writhe in anger, their massive forms looming over the courtyard like storm clouds. Nathan could feel their gaze, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on him, but he didn't waver. He had made his choice. He would not let fear control him. Not anymore. With a deep breath, Nathan raised his voice once more. You may have power, but you are not invincible. We've been living in fear for too long, and we are done with it. You are nothing but ancient monsters who feed on the suffering of others. But that ends now. A moment of stillness passed. Then, as if they had reached some unspoken understanding, the gods' presence began to diminish. Slowly but unmistakably, their power began to wane. The dark mass in the sky began to shrink, the shadows retreating, their grip loosening. Nathan could feel the change in the air as the gods' influence faltered. You've lost, Nathan said, his voice low but triumphant. We're not afraid anymore. The massive shadow above them flickered, its shape flickering as if it were unstable. And then, with a final, echoing roar, it collapsed in on itself, disappearing into the void. The air cleared, the storm faded, the gods, for all their power, were gone. Nathan stood in the courtyard, breathing heavily, his heart racing. He looked over at Ariana, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. She had been right. They had done it. They had faced the gods and won. The ground beneath them was still, the trembling now a distant memory. The sky overhead was clear once more, the sun breaking through the clouds as if the world had been given a second chance. Ariana turned to Nathan, her voice quiet but full of emotion. You did it! We did it! Nathan nodded, his chest still tight with adrenaline. We did. And for the first time since arriving on this world, Nathan felt the weight of fear lift. It was gone, replaced by something far stronger, hope. Together they turned toward the gathering of Zarithians who were watching in stunned silence. The priests, the people, they were all free now, free from the grip of fear, free from the gods' control. And as Nathan and Ariana stood side by side, they realized that the true power wasn't in the gods or in any ancient ritual. It was in the strength of the human spirit, the power of defiance, and the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the odds.